poor boy shouted at a millionaire, "You are my father." When the man saw the boy's mother, he was in shock. Jack was just another shadow among the many that wandered the cold streets of New York. The winter showed no mercy, and the morning fog veiled the city's concrete glimmer. At only 10 years old, his frail frame and large eyes, filled with dreams and fears, stood in stark contrast to the merciless gray surrounding him. He clutched tightly to a tattered blanket his mother had given him before disappearing from his life forever. Before continuing, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. The nights were long, and the days felt endless. Jack survived on scraps from the markets and the occasional kindness of strangers. Yet, no matter how harsh his reality, he refused to let the darkness extinguish the brightness of his memories of Emily, his mother. She was everything to him, even now as just a memory. Her gentle voice echoed in his mind, saying, "Never give up, Jack. You're stronger than you think." During the day, he roamed Times Square, marveling at the bright billboards and luxurious storefronts. The opulence surrounding him served as a cruel reminder of the chasm between his reality and the dreams he barely dared to dream. At night, he found refuge in an alley near the public library, where he felt a little safer. There was something about Jack that set him apart from the other street kids. He possessed a fierce determination, a flame that refused to be extinguished, even in the face of relentless hardship. That flame was fueled by the words his mother had whispered to him on her deathbed. Words he had never shared with anyone. "Your father is out there, Jack. He's an important man. He doesn't know about you, but one day you'll find him." Jack struggled to believe it could be true. How could someone so powerful and successful possibly be his father? But the hope, however faint, was all he had. He clung to that promise like a treasure, a source of motivation to keep going, even during his darkest moments. It was on a cold, sunny afternoon that Jack noticed unusual activity in the central square. A stage had been set up, and people in suits and elegant dresses bustled about, making last-minute adjustments for what seemed to be an important event. Jack watched from a distance, intrigued. It wasn't often that something so grand happened near his usual haunts. Soon, sleek black cars began arriving. People stepped out with a confidence Jack had only seen in movies. Among them was a man who commanded the scene with his presence. Tall, with neatly combed hair and a flawless suit, he greeted the attendees with a rehearsed smile, though his eyes radiated coldness. "William Carter." Jack heard the murmurs among the onlookers around him. "That's him, the billionaire who created that revolutionary tech company. I heard he's launching a charity organization. Supposedly, it's going to save the world." The crowd spoke of William as though he were a near-mythical figure, untouchable and larger than life. Jack couldn't take his eyes off the man. There was something about him that intrigued Jack, though he couldn't quite place what it was. Maybe it was the way he seemed so distant, so untouchable. Maybe it was a lingering echo of something his mother had once said. He tried to shake the thought away, convincing himself it was just a coincidence. Across the square, William ascended the stage to deliver a speech. He began speaking about his commitment to helping the less fortunate, emphasizing how his new organization would transform lives. His voice was strong and confident, but Jack felt a strange discomfort listening to him. The speech seemed meticulously rehearsed, detached from the harsh reality Jack lived every day. Even so, Jack couldn't stop staring at him. Who is this man? He asked himself as memories of his mother flooded his mind. He tried to convince himself he was imagining things, but the feeling inside him grew, like a storm on the verge of breaking. As William concluded his speech on stage, the crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. Jack, however, felt his palms grow sweaty, and his heart pounded in his chest. There was something he couldn't control, an impulse that swelled with every word William spoke. The cold of the square seemed to disappear. All Jack could see was William. Suddenly, without a second thought, Jack pushed his way through the curious onlookers. His steps were hesitant at first, but as he drew closer to the stage, an inexplicable courage took hold of him. He didn't know exactly what he would say, but he knew he had to do this. When William stepped down from the stage, surrounded by security and reporters, Jack shouted with all the strength his small body could muster, "My mom said you're my dad." The entire square fell silent. It was as if time had stopped, freezing the expressions of everyone present. William, who was already walking away, stopped abruptly. His gaze, once brimming with confidence and control, turned toward the sound. He scanned the crowd and locked eyes with Jack. The boy stood there, trembling, his face marked by the vulnerability of someone who had just exposed a deeply personal secret. The security guards began moving toward Jack, but William raised his hand, signaling them to stop. The curiosity and confusion in his eyes were unmistakable. He took a few steps toward the boy, studying him carefully. Jack didn't flinch. Despite his fear, he stood his ground, staring back at the man who was now just a few feet away. "What did you say?" William asked, his voice quieter but still authoritative. Jack took a deep breath. "My mom said you're my dad," he repeated, his voice shaky but full of conviction. Before William could respond, camera flashes lit up the scene, and reporters murmured amongst themselves. The moment had turned into a spectacle, with the crowd around them eager for what would happen next. But something in William's gaze shifted. He froze, as though a tidal wave of memories had struck him all at once. His face turned pale, and the hand he had slipped into his pocket to conceal his unease began to tremble slightly. When Jack mentioned his mother, it felt as if the ground beneath him had disappeared. William remained motionless, as if trapped in a bubble of silence, while the world around him continued at a frenetic pace. Jack's words echoed in his mind. "My mom said you're my dad." It wasn't just a shock. It was an explosion of memories he had buried long ago, fragments of a life he had chosen to forget. His eyes stayed fixed on the boy in front of him. Jack didn't seem like just a desperate child. There was something in the way he looked at him that stirred an unsettling feeling. The shape of his jawline, the set of his eyes, and the quiet intensity in his gaze felt hauntingly familiar. It was as if he were staring into a mirror of the past, a reflection of the youth he once had. "Who's your mother?" The question escaped his lips before he could think. He needed an answer, even if he dreaded the truth. Jack hesitated, his breathing heavy, but his reply was clear. Emily Green. The name hit William like a stone sinking into his stomach. For a moment, the world spun. Emily, the woman he had loved and abandoned. She had been a whirlwind of emotion and energy in his life, someone who made him forget his cold, calculated ambitions. But he had left all that behind when he chose the path of unbridled ambition. Emily had been a chapter he'd closed with ruthless finality, but now she was back, bringing with her a consequence he had never imagined. The growing murmurs of the crowd broke William's silence. Who is this kid? Could it be true? This feels like a movie scene. He ignored all of it, unable to take his eyes off Jack. The boy was vulnerable, yet there was a quiet strength about him that made him stand out, even in such a chaotic moment. William's face hardened. He was a man used to high-pressure situations, but this wasn't a negotiation or a business deal. This was a truth he didn't know how to process. Without answering, he turned to his security team and spoke in a low tone. "Get the cameras out of here. Now!" The men began dispersing the reporters, but the situation was already spiraling out of control. William knew the moment was already being broadcast and would make headlines within hours. His mind raced, searching for a way to contain the disaster. But what disturbed him most wasn't the public fallout. It was the memory of Emily. She had been the only light in a past he had worked so hard to erase. And now, standing before him, was the living proof of what he had lost. As the security team pushed back cameras and dispersed the growing crowd, William remained frozen, staring at the ground as if it held the answers to the storm raging inside him. Emily Green's name echoed in his mind, bringing back images he had fought so hard to suppress. He remembered her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams of becoming an artist, and how she had accused him of being a cold, success-obsessed man. "I can't live alongside someone who only sees numbers and victories," Emily had said the last time they saw each other, years ago. "You can have the world at your feet, William, but you'll never have what truly matters." Back then, he had laughed at her words, dismissing them as naive. Today, they struck him like a punch to the chest. Jack stayed where he was, watching William's every move. There was a mix of anxiety and hurt on his face. He hadn't expected the man to embrace him with open arms, but the prolonged silence was becoming unbearable. He couldn't tell if William believed him, was furious, or simply didn't care. Finally, William raised his eyes and looked at Jack again. There was something different in his expression now, as if he were searching for an answer in the boy's face. He took a step forward and crouched down to Jack's level. "Emily," he began, but his voice faltered. Taking a deep breath, he tried again. Where's your mother now?" Jack's gaze darkened, and he clenched his hands against the worn fabric of his jacket. "She's dead," he said, his tone a mixture of sadness and anger. "2 years ago. She told me to find you, but I didn't know how. Until today." The revelation hit William like a sledgehammer. Emily gone? He couldn't process the thought. She had always been so full of life, so passionate, so fierce. And now, she was gone, existing only through this boy. A wave of guilt engulfed him, and for the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't control. I didn't know," he said, almost as if speaking to himself. It was a raw, painful truth. He didn't know because he had never wanted to know. He had left her behind, choosing ambition over love, and now he was paying the price. Jack crossed his arms, trying to maintain a firm posture, but his hands were trembling. "You didn't care about her, did you?" he asked, his voice sharp as a blade. "She died alone and I was left alone. And now you're here, pretending like this matters to you." William felt the weight of those words. He could respond in 1,000 ways, could use his well-honed verbal skills to deflect or twist the situation, but none of it felt right. There was something about the boy's pain that completely disarmed him. For the first time in a very long time, he had no answers. The tension between William and Jack was almost tangible, as if the air around them had become electrically charged. For a moment, it seemed like everything had stopped. The voices of the crowd, the biting cold of New York, even the persistent flashes from the few cameras still nearby. Only silence remained, a space where Jack's words echoed repeatedly in William's mind. "You didn't care about her, did you?" The question, heavy with accusation, stirred something within him that he couldn't name. He had always been a calculating man, someone who shaped situations to his advantage. But now, standing before this boy, every mask he had ever worn felt fragile and useless. I didn't know she was sick," William said, his voice more hesitant than he would have liked. He ran a hand over his face, as if trying to wipe away the growing weight of guilt within him. Jack simply stared at him, saying nothing, but the boy's silence spoke louder than any words ever could. Jack was used to dealing with people who pretended to care. He saw it in the fleeting glances of strangers who turned away when he stretched out his hand for help. But there was something different about William. Despite his anger, Jack could see real confusion and pain in the man's eyes, and that infuriated him even more. He didn't want to believe this man could feel anything at all. "She wasn't sick," Jack finally said, breaking the silence like a knife cutting through air. She got tired of fighting alone, tired of trying to find you. I did what I could, but I was just a kid. She said you were never going to show up." Those words pierced William in a way he hadn't anticipated. It felt as though the control he had always held over his life was slipping through his fingers. He tried to speak, but no word seemed adequate to respond to what Jack had just said. One of William's security guards stepped closer and murmured something about needing to leave before the situation escalated further. But William ignored him. He couldn't leave. Not now. Not after everything he had just heard. He crouched down to Jack's level again, though the invisible barrier between them still felt insurmountable. "Jack," he began, and this time his voice was steadier, though it carried an unmistakable weight of emotion he couldn't hide. "I'm not going to pretend I know how you feel. I'm not going to ask you to forgive me. Not now. But if you'll let me, I want to try to make this right. I owe you that, and I owe it to her." Jack didn't respond right away. He was tired of empty promises, of hopes that never materialized. Still, there was something in the sincerity of William's voice that made a small part of him hesitate. He didn't trust this man, but deep down, he desperately wanted to believe that someone cared about him. After their confrontation in the square, William insisted that Jack come with him to a more private place. There was so much that needed to be said, but the weight of it all made it impossible to talk here, under the prying eyes of strangers. Reluctantly, Jack agreed, not because he trusted William, but because, no matter how much he hated to admit it, he wanted answers. Answers only this man could give. They walked together toward William's car, a sleek black luxury vehicle that stood in stark contrast to everything Jack had ever known. As he stepped inside, the smell of leather and the pristine shine of the interior made him feel out of place. He said nothing, staring out the window, watching the streets of New York blur past as if they were part of a world he no longer recognized. William, sitting beside him, couldn't take his eyes off the boy. He saw more than just a thin, tired child. He saw Emily in every feature of that face. The resemblance was undeniable, and it made him feel as though he were reliving a past he had thought was long buried. They arrived at the hotel where William was staying. He chose a discreet room and instructed all the staff to leave, ensuring it was just him and Jack. The room was enormous, with a marble table at its center and windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city. Jack, however, was unimpressed. He sat in the farthest chair, arms crossed, staring at William with distrust. "Why did you abandon me?" The question burst out before Jack could stop himself. His voice filled with anger and sadness. It was the only thing that mattered to him. Everything his mother had suffered, everything he had endured, it all seemed to boil down to this one question. William took a deep breath, feeling the weight of guilt pressing down on him again. He knew there was no simple answer, much less one that could erase the years of pain he had caused. "I didn't know you existed," he began, his voice low, almost a whisper. "When I left your mother, I was blinded by ambition. Emily tried to show me that there was more to life than work, but I didn't listen. I hurt her, and she pushed me away. I thought that was the end." Jack narrowed his eyes, unconvinced. "And you never tried to talk to her? Never wanted to know what happened to her after that?" "I should have," William admitted, his words heavy with regret. "But the truth is, I was afraid. I knew she was right about me, and facing that meant admitting how wrong I was. I was a coward, Jack. I chose the easy way out, and now you're the one paying for it." A heavy silence settled between them. Jack wanted to scream, to accuse him, to demand more satisfying answers. But at the same time, he felt a part of himself wavering. As much as he hated to admit it, he saw sincerity in William's eyes. Finally, Jack broke the silence. "If my mom were here, she'd say you don't deserve any of this. Not the money, not the success. And maybe she'd be right." William lowered his head, accepting the boy's words as a verdict. "I can't change what I did," he said, "but I want to try to be someone you can be proud of. I owe you that, and her." Jack remained seated in the distant chair, as if any closeness to William was dangerous. His eyes wandered around the room, a mix of curiosity and discomfort on his face. The space was too large, too clean, almost sterile, as if it were a place where no one truly lived. He caught his reflection in the polished marble table. His worn and dirty jacket clashed starkly with the immaculate shine of the furniture. William, on the other hand, felt the weight of the silence. He knew the distance between them wasn't just physical. There was an emotional wall between them, one he would have to climb, brick by brick. William tried to ease the tension, motioning toward a silver cart in the corner of the room. "Are you hungry? I can order something for you." Jack shook his head. "I'm fine," he replied curtly, though his stomach betrayed him with a faint growl. He hated the idea of accepting anything from this man, as if it would be some form of surrender. William noticed the boy's hesitation and chose not to press the issue. He stood and walked over to one of the windows, gazing out at the New York skyline. "I never thought I'd find myself here," he said, his voice softer now, "trying to explain something I can't even fully understand." Turning back to Jack, his eyes were tired but sincere. "You have every right to hate me, but I want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Jack crossed his arms, raising an eyebrow. "That's it? You think just because you said some nice words, I'm going to forget everything? My mom cried because of you. Do you know what it's like to see that? Do you know what it's like to watch someone give up?" The boy's anger hit William like a blow. He wanted to respond, but he knew there were no words that could ease that pain. Instead of speaking, he slowly approached and sat in a chair nearby. "No, I don't know," he admitted, looking directly into Jack's eyes. "But I want to understand. If you'll let me, I want to know everything. About her, about you, about what I missed. You don't owe me that, but I need to hear it." The sincerity in William's tone caught Jack off guard. He was used to empty promises, to people saying one thing and doing another. But something about this moment felt different. Jack looked away, feeling the tears threatening to fall. He blinked quickly, determined not to show any weakness. "I don't know if I can tell you everything," Jack murmured, almost to himself. "It's too much, and I don't even know if you deserve to hear it." William nodded, respecting the boy's hesitation. "I understand, but I'm here, Jack. I'll be here whenever you're ready." The next morning, Jack woke up in a room that felt like it belonged to another world. The bed was soft as clouds, the sheets impeccably white, and the heavy curtains filtered the morning light streaming through the massive windows. He sat still for a few seconds, unsure of where he was, until the events of the previous day came rushing back like a lightning bolt. He sat up in bed, still wearing the same jacket he had on the streets. He didn't want to remove that layer, as if it were the only thing tethering him to what felt real. Looking around, he noticed a breakfast tray on a nearby table, with a simple note beside it. "I don't want to push anything. Just eat if you feel like it. W." Jack picked up the tray, the irresistible smell of warm pancakes and maple syrup wafting up to meet him. Despite his hunger, he hesitated. Eating it felt like accepting something from that man, and he wasn't sure he was ready for that. Yet, hunger eventually won out, and he began eating slowly, each bite accompanied by a mix of relief and guilt. As Jack finished eating, William knocked gently on the door before entering. This time, he wasn't wearing a suit, just a simple shirt and jeans, something that made him seem less intimidating, almost human. He glanced at the empty plate and offered a faint smile but didn't comment on it. Instead, he sat down in a chair near the window. "I know all of this must feel strange," William began, his voice calm. I don't know where to start. So, I'll let you decide." Jack set the fork aside, his eyes studying the man in front of him. He seemed different from the billionaire who had delivered that speech in the square. There was something less polished, more genuine. But Jack still didn't know if he could trust him. "You want to know about my mom?" Jack asked, his tone challenging. William nodded, his gaze softening. "I want to know anything you're willing to share." Jack took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep waters. "She was amazing," he began, his voice quieter now. Even when everything was hard, she always made it seem like things would be okay. But they weren't. She got sad, really sad. And in the end, it felt like she was giving up. William swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every word Jack spoke. He tried to picture Emily in that state, but it was impossible. The woman he had known was full of life, a force of nature. The thought that he might have played a part in that pain was a blow he struggled to bear. "She talked about you," Jack continued, his tone almost bitter. "Not much, but enough for me to know you were important to her. And enough for me to know you hurt her." William lowered his head, taking in the accusation. He wanted to defend himself, to explain his reasons, but he knew that anything he said would sound hollow. Instead, he said what he truly felt. "I should never have left." Jack was silent for a moment, studying William's expression. He wanted to hate him, wanted to push him out of his life, but something about the man's vulnerability made him hesitate. For the first time, he didn't just see a distant billionaire. He saw someone as flawed as anyone else. After that tense conversation in the hotel room, William realized that words wouldn't be enough. He knew he needed to act. For years, his instinct had been to solve problems with money or influence, but this time was different. Jack didn't want a check or empty promises. He needed something William had never learned to give: time, effort, and presence. The next day, William invited Jack to go out, saying only, "I want to show you something." Jack hesitated, suspicious, but eventually agreed, more out of curiosity than willingness. They left together in one of William's cars, but this time, the destination wasn't anything luxurious. They arrived in a modest, almost run-down neighborhood where the facades of the houses told stories of struggle and resilience. Jack recognized the type of place immediately. He had grown up in a similar one. William parked in front of a small community school with weathered walls and a makeshift soccer field beside it. "Why are we here?" Jack asked, crossing his arms. William got out of the car and began walking toward the building, gesturing for Jack to follow. Inside, the atmosphere was warm but humble. A few children played in a room filled with worn books and old toys while volunteers organized activities. A woman, who appeared to be the director, approached them with a warm smile. "Mr. Carter, what a surprise to see you here again," she said, shaking William's hand. "I brought someone to see the place," William replied, glancing at Jack. "This is Jack." Jack looked around, confused. He had expected something grandiose, an attempt to impress him with William's wealth. But what he saw was simplicity and purpose. William crouched down to Jack's level and said, "I've been coming here for a few years now. I help with donations and sometimes join the activities. These kids, many of them have been through tough times like you. I thought it might be good for you to see that there are people who genuinely care." Jack felt a lump in his throat. He didn't know how to respond. Part of him wanted to dismiss this as another calculated attempt by William to redeem himself, but another part couldn't ignore what he saw. The children were laughing, the volunteers were working with dedication, and there was an energy of hope in this place that he hadn't felt in a long time. A small girl approached Jack, holding a colorful drawing. "Do you want to paint with me?" she asked, her smile shy but inviting. Jack looked at William, who simply nodded encouragingly. Not entirely sure why, he agreed. He sat next to her and began painting while William watched from a distance, giving him space. For a moment, Jack felt something he couldn't quite describe. It wasn't exactly happiness, but a sense that maybe, just maybe, he could let his guard down for a little while. Jack ended up spending most of the afternoon at the small community school, something he hadn't expected to do. The girl who invited him to paint, named Mia, was talkative and full of energy, the complete opposite of Jack. She chatted about everything. The stories she read, the drawings she made, even how she loved the smell of the old books in the reading room. Jack listened silently, but to his surprise, he felt comfortable. It was as if, for a brief moment, he didn't have to carry the weight of everything he'd been through. William observed from a distance, careful not to intrude on Jack's space. He saw the boy smile, a small, shy smile, but it seemed to light up his face for the first time since they had met. It was a small moment, but for William, it carried immense meaning. He realized that earning Jack's trust would be a slow process, filled with little steps like this one. As the sun began to set, William called Jack to head back. Jack waved goodbye to Mia and followed William to the car. The drive back was quiet, but it wasn't the tense silence of before. It felt more like they were both processing what had happened. Back at the hotel, after they returned to the room, William decided to take another step. He sat in a nearby armchair and looked at Jack, who was sitting on the couch, staring at his hands. "Did you like it there?" William asked, his voice calm. Jack shrugged, but there was no hostility in his expression. It was different. "Nice, I guess. I'm glad you liked it," William said. He paused before continuing. "I want to show you more places like that. Not just places, but parts of my life. If you'll let me." Jack looked at him, narrowing his eyes slightly. Why are you trying so hard? Do you think you can fix everything with trips and nice things?" The question hit William, but he didn't look away. "No, Jack," he replied honestly. "I know I can't fix what happened. Nothing I do will bring your mom back or erase what you've been through. But I want you to know that I'm here now. It's not perfect, I know, but it's all I can offer." Jack was silent for a moment, processing his words. He didn't know what to feel. Part of him wanted to reject it all, to hold onto the anger and resentment that had shielded him for so long. But another part, a smaller but growing part, wanted to believe that maybe William was telling the truth. "Fine," Jack finally said, his voice barely audible. "But don't think I'm going to forget what happened. Not anytime soon. I don't expect you to forget," William said with a small smile. "I just want a chance to prove I can be someone you can trust." Jack looked away but didn't respond. Something inside him felt a little lighter, though he wasn't sure what it meant just yet. The next morning, William decided it was time to share something more personal with Jack. He knew that to build any kind of connection, he'd need to show that he, too, had scars, that his life wasn't as perfect as it seemed. As they ate breakfast in the hotel room, William began slowly, his voice calm but filled with intention. "Jack, you probably think I have everything, don't you? Money, power, success. But the truth is, I've been lost too. Not in the same way as you, but lost." Jack looked at him with curiosity, though his face remained neutral. "You? Lost? How can someone with so much money ever feel lost?" William gave a sad smile. "I didn't grow up with all of this, you know. My childhood was complicated. My father was difficult. He didn't believe in me, never thought I was good enough. I spent years trying to prove to him that I was someone. But by the time I finally did, he was already gone. And I was left with a life full of things, but empty of people." Jack continued to stare at William, trying to figure out if this was genuine or just another attempt to manipulate him. "And what does that have to do with me?" William leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Jack's. "Everything. I got lost because I chose the wrong things. And in doing so, I lost important people like your mother. I don't want to make the same mistake with you." The words hung in the air for a moment. Jack felt something he couldn't quite explain, an unexpected connection with this man who, until recently, had been just a stranger. Even so, he wasn't ready to fully lower his guard. "My mom didn't need money," Jack said softly. "She needed someone who was there, someone who didn't leave." William nodded, his eyes full of silent regret. "I know. And if I could go back in time, I'd do everything differently. But all I can do now is try to be that person. For you." Jack averted his gaze, his mind swirling with conflicting thoughts. He wanted to believe, but the pain of the past still weighed heavily on him. "This isn't going to be easy," he muttered, almost to himself. "I know it won't," William said with a small smile. "But I'm willing to try, if you'll give me the chance." The days that followed were marked by a strange kind of coexistence between William and Jack. It wasn't exactly comfortable, but the tension had lessened. Jack, still wary, began testing William in subtle ways. He asked direct questions, watched his reactions, and paid close attention to every detail, as if waiting to catch some sign of insincerity. One morning, while they were at the hotel restaurant, Jack decided to be more direct. "If you really want to prove you're telling the truth, show me what you lost," he said, looking at William with a clear challenge in his eyes. William remained silent for a moment, surprised by the intensity of Jack's request. But then he nodded. "All right, let's do this." They got into the car and drove to an older part of New York. During the ride, William seemed lost in thought, as if bracing himself for something he had avoided for a long time. When they arrived, they stood in front of a modest house with a worn facade, in a neighborhood that sharply contrasted with the luxury Jack had started to grow accustomed to. "This was my parents' house," William said as he stepped out of the car. He looked at the building like it was a ghost from his past, something that haunted him but that he could no longer avoid. "This is where I grew up. And this is where I realized that no matter what I did, it would never be enough for my father." Jack followed William to the door, where he hesitated before opening it. The house was empty now, but every corner seemed to carry memories. William pointed to the living room. "I spent hours here, studying, trying to get the best grades. He always said I had to be the best. That second place wasn't good enough." They walked down the hallway to a small office, where an old desk and a worn chair sat. William stopped there, touching the back of the chair as if it were something sacred. "This is where I decided I would do whatever it took to prove him wrong. I worked until I couldn't anymore, and in the end I got everything I wanted. But he wasn't here to see it." Jack watched silently, taking in every word. He had never imagined that William carried so much pain beneath his polished exterior. For the first time, he saw something human in the man. "Why did you never come back here?" Jack asked, his voice softer now. William shrugged, his eyes still on the chair. "Because it reminded me of how much I failed to understand what really mattered. Coming back meant facing that." He then turned to Jack, his gaze a mixture of vulnerability and determination. "But now, with you here, it feels like it finally makes sense. I can't change what happened with him or with your mother, but maybe I can get it right this time." Jack felt a tightness in his chest. He wanted to keep doubting, but it was hard to ignore the honesty he saw in William's eyes. "I don't know if I believe you yet," Jack said, though his voice was less sharp. "But this was different. Thanks for showing me." On the way back to the hotel, the silence in the car was different. It was no longer heavy or uncomfortable, but carried something deeper. Jack stared out the window, lost in thought. William's words echoed in his mind, especially the pain he seemed to carry for never having the chance to mend his relationship with his father. When they arrived at the hotel, Jack surprised himself by taking the initiative to speak. "My mom," he began, hesitant. "She used to sing to me at night. Even when we had nothing, she made it seem like everything would be okay. But I knew she was tired." William, who was about to open the door to their room, stopped and turned to Jack with full attention. He didn't want to interrupt. This was the first time Jack had shared something so personal, and William understood the weight of every word. Jack continued, his voice growing softer. "In her last few months, she started crying more. I'd ask her what was wrong, but she'd just say she was sorry, that she wished things had been different. I think she was talking about you." He pulled his jacket tighter around himself, as if trying to shield himself from the weight of those memories. William felt a deep ache hearing this. He had known that his choices had left scars on Emily, but hearing it directly from Jack was almost unbearable. "I never wanted her to suffer," he said, his voice hoarse. "I was selfish, and she deserved someone so much better than I was. But even so, she was stronger than I could ever be." Jack nodded slowly as if agreeing. "She was strong," he said with a faint, sad smile. "And she wanted me to be strong too. but sometimes it's hard. It's like, even when you try to move forward, the past won't let you. William stepped closer and knelt down to meet Jack at eye level. He wanted to place a hand on the boy's shoulder but hesitated, afraid of crossing a boundary. "I know what that's like," he said, "and maybe I'll never be able to fix what the past has done to us. But if you let me, I want to be there to face it with you." Together, Jack looked at him, and for the first time, his eyes revealed something beyond distrust. There was pain, but also a small spark of hope. He didn't say anything, but the fact that he didn't pull away was a sign that maybe he was willing to try. They spent the rest of the evening in silence, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind of quiet that comes when two people start to accept that healing isn't easy, but it's possible, if they're willing to walk the path together. The next morning, William woke up early with a fixed idea in his mind. He knew that just listening to Jack's pain and sharing his own wasn't enough. He needed to show the boy that he was committed to helping him build something new, something he could call a life. After breakfast, William asked Jack to come out with him again. Jack, intrigued, asked, "Where are we going now?" William smiled with an air of mystery. "You'll see. Trust me. Just a little." They got in the car and drove to a small red brick building in Brooklyn. Jack looked out the window, recognizing the area. It was a modest place but full of life, with people walking along the sidewalks and small shops scattered across the streets. When they parked, Jack noticed a simple sign above the door. "Green Hope Community Center." "Why are we here?" Jack asked, frowning. William held the door open for him. "This place was one of your mother's favorite projects. She talked about it a lot in the months before you were born. She dreamed of creating a space where kids could learn, create, and find purpose." I didn't pay much attention back then, but after you told me about her, I started looking into it. I found out that her project was taken up by others in the community. I thought you should see it. Jack stepped inside slowly, his eyes widening as he took in the space. It was a bright and vibrant area, with colorful walls covered in drawings, murals, and inspiring quotes. Children laughed in an improvised classroom, while teenagers practiced music in one corner. On the other side of the hall was a small but welcoming library. An older man approached, smiling warmly. "Mr. Carter, good to see you again. And this is Jack," William said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Emily Green's son." The man's smile grew even brighter. "Ah, Emily. She was the inspiration for all of this. She believed in bringing hope, and look, we're here because of her." Jack stood still, trying to process it all. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, as though something that had been missing was finally starting to fall into place. His mother had never told him about this dream. Maybe she hadn't had the time, or maybe she thought he was too young to understand. "I didn't know about this," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Well, now you do," William replied. "And maybe you can be part of it. You don't have to decide now. But I thought you should see the impact your mother left on the world." Jack spent the next few minutes exploring the center, interacting with some of the children and admiring the murals on the walls. He stopped in front of one particular frame, a photo of Emily with a small caption, "Dreams plant roots." "Thank you, Emily." The tears came without warning, quiet and unbidden. He tried to hide them, but William noticed. He didn't say anything, just stepped closer and placed a hand on Jack's shoulder, offering silent support. The days following their visit to the Green Hope Community Center were transformative for Jack. He was still cautious, still carried deep wounds, but something inside him was beginning to shift. For the first time, he didn't feel completely alone. There was something real in William's efforts, something that didn't feel like an empty attempt at redemption, but a genuine desire to build a future. One afternoon, as they walked through the park, Jack suddenly stopped and turned to William. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice full of hesitation. William frowned, confused. "Do what?" Jack lowered his eyes, kicking a small stone on the path. "Trust you." I want to try, but it's hard. Every time I think I might be able to, I remember what happened with my mom, what she went through, and then it feels wrong." William knelt down to meet Jack's eyes, speaking softly but firmly. "Jack, I'm not asking you to trust me right now. That takes time. I just want you to know that I'll be here, no matter how long it takes. I'm not going anywhere." Jack didn't respond right away. He bit his lip, battling the emotions bubbling inside him. Finally, he just nodded, a small gesture, but one heavy with meaning. A few days later, William decided to take Jack back to the community center. This time, Jack seemed more at ease, more open. As they walked through the space, the director approached them with a smile. "Jack, we've got something I think you'll want to see." He led them to a room where a mural honoring Emily was being finished. At the center of the mural was a stylized image of Emily holding a blooming tree, surrounded by children laughing and playing. Below the artwork, the words read, "Where there is love, there is hope." Jack stood in front of the mural, speechless. He reached out and gently touched the painting, as if it were something sacred. "My mom would have liked this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She would have been proud of you," William said softly. Jack turned to William, and for the first time, there was something in his eyes that resembled forgiveness. "I think she would have given you a second chance too." William felt emotion welling up inside him but kept his composure. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be someone worthy of that chance," he promised. In that moment, Jack took a small step toward William. A movement so subtle it was almost imperceptible, yet it carried immense weight. He gave William a brief hug, awkward and hesitant, but sincere. William returned the gesture gently, as if holding something precious. As they left the community center that afternoon, Jack reached out and held William's arm for the first time, as if seeking a bit of support. It wasn't a grand gesture, but for both of them, it marked the beginning of something new. A future built on the promise of love, effort, and reconnection. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like and a comment. Let me know which city you're watching this video from. A big hug, and see you in the next story.